Hello, and welcome to our little Speakers on Careers in Conservation speaker panel. It's good to see you all here. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. I know we will.
Hey, hi everybody. My name's Lance. I'm the Executive Director at Wildlife Preservation Canada. We're a Canadian NGO that is saving endangered species and populations here in Canada, and really focus on hands-on interventions. So things like conservation breeding and releases, reintroductions, head starting, nest protection, things like that. So my sort of background was that, like you folks, I studied biology and zoology at university. I got my start on a summer crew in Nova Scotia with the provincial government, working with wildlife, and then I did that for several years. I had some really great mentors, and then that also led into a master's working with eider ducks. My real jump in a career as conservation happened in 1997 when I was chosen to be Canada's new NOAA by Wildlife Preservation Canada, same organization I work with now. And for the last 30 years or so, we send one young Canadian biologist overseas to work in the Indian Ocean on being actually embedded with a conservation program, the Marine Wildlife Foundation, working with endangered species. And then they also study at the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust in England. But this then led to a whole series of new connections and networks for me, and I just kept taking advantage of each one that came along after that. And so I ended up in New Zealand, where I volunteered for a bit. Then I also ended up going and working with condors in California, and that was an internship. But then it also led to other experiences where I worked in Mauritius for 4 years, managing their programs, and then spent 8 years in Madagascar, managing conservation programs there again for sort of critically endangered species, but it was a great experience because I was working with all kinds of different things, tortoises and lemurs, and then it also led to a PhD at York University here, where I was working with a hawk called ridgeway's hawk down in the Dominican Republic. And then all that has sort of come around full circle, where in 2018, I moved into this position here with Wildlife Preservation Canada back here, and we're doing the same sort of work here that I was doing overseas.
Hello, my name's Jane Gilbert, and I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And our organization specializes in private land conservation coast to coast, although we're working increasingly more now in the north as well, but not on private land, of course, because a lot of that is Indigenous and Crown land, but in terms of bringing our conservation expertise to projects and large landscapes. I did not come to my position from a background in science, at least strictly not in science. My undergraduate degree is in journalism and law. My graduate degree is an arts degree in the history and philosophy of science. I like to say that I came to this job because of a box of tea and the Cookie Monster. Let me explain. I think if you look inside, each one of you will find that you're drawn to nature because somebody inspired you at some point in your life and gave you that connection. In my case, it was my grandmother. And I grew up in England, and in the late 50s and I think through the early 60s, the tea companies, Typhoo and Brook Bond, used to put these little cards into the packets of tea, just a couple of centimeters long, and they would feature themes. So it would be travel around the world and pictures of exotic destinations. But she loved nature. And so the ones she collected were wildflowers and trees and butterflies and exotic birds and exotic animals. And she pasted them all meticulously into these catalogs, which I still have to this day. And it's funny when you think about emigrating to Canada and what we left behind, which was most of our household, and what we brought with us, those catalogs made the trip. So they must have been exceedingly important to me as a little girl, and I still have them to this day. So that was my first connection to nature. The Cookie Monster is the Muppets. And as a teenager, when I was looking around to what I would study in university, the Muppet Show fascinated me. Not 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 the not the characters themselves per se, but the production of it and the technical nature of the production. And that pushed me through into TV production and journalism. So that's why my undergraduate is in journalism. I did 30 years in journalism, much of it in production, a lot of it in front of the camera as an anchor for major newscasts across the country. In the last 10 years, I switched to the Discovery Channel, where I worked for a program that eventually was called this Daily Planet. And it now no longer exists, unfortunately, but it was a 1-hour daily news magazine about the science, technology, and engineering behind the headlines. And it was a fascinating opportunity. And from there, that led me to my master's degree. And at the end of my master's, which I did quite late in my professional life, I looked around and went, is that all there is? There's got to be more to life than this TV thing. I must be able to leverage my skills somewhere else for a more meaningful cause. And then a couple of connections and some networking later, and I was into the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and I've been there now. It was supposed to be an interim step, just a short job, because it wouldn't be that busy or hectic, right? Well, it's been 13 years, and it's the busiest job I've ever had. So nature is a very busy place to work, but it's far more meaningful than anything else I did. So there you go. A cup of tea and the Cookie Monster can launch you into a career in conservation.
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Rutta. I am a third-year student, a PhD student at Queen's School of Environmental Studies. I am from Tanzania, which is in East Africa. I did my undergrad back home in Tanzania. I majored in environmental studies and geography. And after that, spent about 8 years working in forestry conservation, wildlife conservation, and renewable energy programs. I was fortunate enough to work with large conservation organizations such as WWF, the World Wildlife Fund office in Tanzania, where I was involved in what we call community forest management. By then, our job was to help communities develop land use plans so that they can have village land reserves to increase protection of land, especially at village level. One of the major conservation problems that we had, and we still have in Tanzania, is deforestation because of poverty, because of lack of sustainable energy sources. I mean, most of cooking energy sources comes from firewood and charcoal, and that for many years has been a major problem. So I was involved in that program. So after 8 years of working in community conservation programs, I decided now it's time for me to come for graduate school. I did my master's in environmental policy in Memorial University of Newfoundland. Spent 2 years there, which was it was a very interesting program coming from my policy background and doing what I was learning now. Although it was a bit cold, I mean, I come from a very tropical climate, hot, and going through Newfoundland was a bit tough in terms of the environment. So I spent 2 years in Newfoundland, did my master's, then I came to Queen's in 2019, and right now that's where I am. I'm doing my PhD. But I was also involved during my time with WWF and other international organizations such as the German Development Agency of International Development. I was also involved in, I founded a lot of youth environmental-led organizations such as Tanzania Youth Environmental Network. We also had a wildlife movement, which we used to call it Marafiki wa Tembo Initiative, which is like a Friends of Elephants, which was an initiative to educate, empower young people, especially in rural areas, to address the wildlife poaching. In Tanzania, if you kind of follow the news when it comes to wildlife poaching, Tanzania was one of the countries that was hard hit in the last 10 years. There was a time we were losing about up to 30 elephants per day due to illegal poaching. And we looked at some of the studies that were done by WWF and other conservation organizations, one of the things that came out was, I mean, a lot of poachers were coming from the communities themselves. So people in the communities were collaborating with poachers that were coming from other parts of the country into killing elephants. And one of the things that was driving that is because the community members were not, they didn't see the value why they should protect elephants. So my job, me and my friends in the movement, what we are basically doing was to go to the community, especially the farmers, who for them, I mean, elephants were damaging their crops and farmers, but they're also damaging properties. And they didn't see the value why they should protect elephants per se. So our job was to go in the field, in rural communities, in deep remote areas, teaching the communities about why it is important to protect the elephants and telling them this is the national asset. The reason that we have all these tourists coming in our communities is because of these elephants. Once we have these elephants wiped out, you are not going to see water wells that are being built by the government. You are not going to see desks that are going to be brought by the government. It's because it's this the revenue that is coming from the tourists that are coming to look at the elephants, from the tourists that are coming to look at other wildlife animals. And I would say that kind of worked a bit. It was a small initiative, but I think it worked a bit. And in 2017, 2018, I was recognized by National Geographic Society, where they give us a small grant to continue that work, especially on building the capacity of young generation, especially in rural areas, into protecting conservation, especially elephants, which was a big problem by then. So my background or my previous experience on conservation has been on working with the community per se, and that has been something that I've been doing for a year. I will end right there.
You answered a little bit in your intro, but why did you personally choose a career in conservation, and would you recommend it to others?
Absolutely. And I'm living proof that conservation needs all kinds of skills. So, we need accountants, we need storytellers, we need human resources specialists, we need, all sorts of skills, and we need the biologists and the field staff and that as well. I think there is so much scope and opportunity at the moment. Particularly, I see so many young women in this forum, and I'm delighted to see you and to let you know that there is a place for you. I think that we are perhaps underrepresented in the general media. We'll maybe talk about that a little later, that people don't necessarily understand that there's a climate change crisis and there's a biodiversity loss crisis. And we sometimes get kind of missed in that. And there are huge opportunities to put that biodiversity crisis front and center in people's lives, and to help them understand the importance of nature for all of us and our future.
I mean, I think for me, I mean, it was a natural fit. I mean, going back before, even during my secondary school and high school, I was very much involved into organizing. We used to call them excursion trips to the national parks. I was one of the person that was organizing those trips. And by then, it took about 6 months to organize a trip, because most of the national parks were very far, were a bit distance, and the road network was bad. So I was coordinating those trips with the government authorities that were giving us permits to go to the national park, with other youth, but also with my teachers. So that kind of got me interested into conservation issues, especially wildlife. But also, I mean, when I went to University of Dar es Salaam, I majored in environmental studies and geography. Now I started to learn into more details about the issues that we are facing. And coming from a third world country where we have tons and pressing issues, conservation issues, from wildlife issues, from forest degradation, from water pollution, from poaching. I mean, I think I have something to do. I mean, as a young person, I think there was an opportunity for me to do something. I mean, I have this knowledge. I think there's something that I can do. But on top of that, I mean, because we have a lot of environmental problems back home, There are a lot of international NGOs, I mean, talking of wildlife, I mean, WWF, talking of TNC, the Nature Conservancy. And the nonprofit sector back home, I mean, account for about 60% of the job market. So when you pursue a degree in either environmental studies or wildlife conservation, you have at least a probability of being employed. That's something that was also attracted me to a career in conservation, which I think, I mean, I wouldn't say it's the same in Canada, but it's different contexts. But for back home, we had a lot of NGOs working that. So at least you were certain that at least you can secure a job after school. In terms of whether would I recommend or not, I don't think, it depends on who and who. I mean, it depends on the personality of the person, depends on what the person likes. If you are the person who likes to be outdoor in the field, working with the community, I think definitely I would recommend. If you are the person who likes to address issues, to solve issues at the community level, definitely I think that is something I would definitely recommend. So, but I'm not saying that it's conservation career is for everyone, but it depends on what you are passionate about and what you are interested in.
I'll just jump in, but I don't have a whole lot to add because I think you've both been quite eloquent. But for me, it wasn't even really a choice. I didn't ever feel like I had a choice because I kind of knew from like my very earliest age, as far back as I can remember, that I was going to work with animals somehow. And even as like a 9 or 10-year-old, all of my books in the house and everything that I was doing, they were all about animals and endangered species. But kind of having said that, there was kind of a period in my late teens and early 20s where I kind of went away from it a bit, although I was still focused on biology and zoology at university. But then it really was that first job that I had working with wildlife in Nova Scotia, where I just remember being outside and on the ocean, and I just remember thinking, this is just amazing. I can actually get paid to do this. So that's what really kind of brought me back, I think. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, after that, everything just seemed to open up. There were different opportunities that came along, and I was always open to taking every opportunity that I could, and just trying to experience as much as I could. So I would say definitely, and similar to what Rutta was saying, you know, if you have an interest in nature or the environment or wildlife, then I absolutely would recommend it. It's for me, it was just like a great gateway to traveling and meeting amazing people and seeing amazing animals and visiting really interesting places. So you know, I had found it to be immensely rewarding. And if it is something that you feel like that you should be doing with your life, then it's something you can definitely make a living out of. So I don't have any regrets with the career that I've had in conservation.
What kind of education or degree path is required to work in conservation? Is it, you know, you have to go all the way to the PhD level right away, or is it something that happens along the path?
I mean, I think, as Jen said, I mean, I think conservation, it's a broad field. I mean, we need a different set of skills. We need a different set of experience. While it is true, people that have done degrees in biology or wildlife conservation are best prepared to work in sustainability issues or conservation. But I think we also have to remember that, I mean, it's not about being a biologist, being a zoologist. We also need other skills. I mean, we need people with geographical background. We need people with economics. We need social scientists who can help us into designing policies and programs. We need people with a background in commerce who can help us with fundraising, writing grants and proposals. So, I mean, we also need people with IT skills. For example, in a lot of land use work, I mean, we use GIS, Geographic Information System, and remote sensing. And these are the skills normally come from people that have IT background, information technology. So if you don't have a biology background, what I can advise for fresh students, for students and young people like us, I think you should identify and explore how your background or your degree is going to contribute in conservation career. You don't necessarily need to have a background in zoology, as I say. You can have other set of skills, but find an area that you think you can contribute. You might be a journalist, but you can be a very good person to tell stories about how communities are addressing the issues at community level. You might have a background in finance. You can be very good in helping researchers that are involved in conservation, how to help them into fundraising and writing grants for corporate social responsibility. So there are a lot of opportunities. It depends on how you set up your skills and see what contribution you can have and you don't have to have a PhD. I mean, you can start from undergrad and growing up, and as you get enough skills and experience, that's what matters.
I think, you know, if I looked across our organizations, we're about 315, 320 people coast to coast. The majority would have an undergraduate degree. A fairly strong percentage would probably have a master's degree, but you know, I'm going across all disciplines here, right?
Mhm.
We have a handful of PhDs, but we have a lot of people who have perhaps done an undergraduate degree and then done a post-secondary certificate somewhere, a college certificate, which has advanced their credentials. The other thing I'd say is don't think you have to have it all figured out today or by the time you graduate with your undergraduate degree. There's a lifetime of learning ahead of you. And if I had to suggest anything, it would be that you need to embrace the need for lifetime learning. And there's always an opportunity to go back and do a more elevated degree or to do micro-credentials. There are tons of opportunities to enhance your skills in particular areas. Rutta mentioned tech, and I would say that it's certainly going to be a concern of ours moving forward in our organization, and the ability to work with big data and to extract what we need from big data, and to innovate our systems and our field systems so that we're collecting data and using it properly. So that certainly is a big area of need, is data and tech.
Yeah, I would definitely again echo what everybody else has said. That degrees really aren't a limiting factor at all towards having a career in conservation. Having said that, and being a bit realistic, there's going to be some positions that you might want to apply for that will have it as a qualification, but it really doesn't end up being a limiting factor. I mean, if you want to if you're leaning towards research and being a scientist, then you would need a graduate degree. But you know, if you want to end up doing field work or working with within a conservation breeding program, or you know, working with the government in conservation roles, then you probably wouldn't need a degree. You know, some of the world's most impactful conservationists have had little to no even formal education. Some of the most dedicated young conservationists that I know don't have an MSc, and I would hire them in a heartbeat because of their, you know, their dedication, and some of them are actually becoming some of my personal heroes for what they're doing. I guess I will talk about having a degree and a PhD. I wouldn't need a PhD to have the position that I have now, for example, but one of the jobs that I did have, the one that I had over in Madagascar, it was a qualification. But at the same time, I didn't actually at one point say I need to go out and go all the way through and get a master's and then get a PhD. The way that it happened for me was more of an opportunity that came along, because I wanted to go down to the Dominican Republic and work with this hawk called Ridgway's hawk that no one knew anything about. There hadn't been any studies done about it. And as I was there, and I was realizing this is going to take a kind of a full-on study on the limiting factors for the species ecology and for conservation genetics. And I thought, well, you know, maybe I can turn it into a degree, but I knew I was going to have to do that study first. So it wasn't something that I was really conscious of that I felt I had to go and get. For a lot of the positions that I've had, I wouldn't have needed to have a PhD.
So how do you turn volunteer work into a paid position?
One thing I would definitely say is just keep at it and keep volunteering as much as you possibly can. I can't really overemphasize, at least my situation, how important it was. It doesn't mean you have to go out and volunteer with something for a long period of time, like over a period of months, but if you can early on start showing a fair amount of variety, I think, in what you're doing. And absolutely make sure when you're starting out that you include it within your CV. I mean, my early resumes were mostly talking about the volunteer work that I've done. And also, when you're starting it, you're probably going to end up doing a fair amount of contract work, and I would sort of treat that the same sort of way, and sort of realize that you're going to be jumping around a fair bit. I think of having a lot of that volunteer experience on my CV starting out, when people saw my CV, they were able to say, wow, this guy's really keen. He's doing all these different things. And the other thing that I would say that's important about volunteering is you may find when you're going into your first few job interviews where you don't have a lot of positions already to draw on. Something that I found was for a lot of the questions that I was getting in the interviews, I was able to go to that volunteer experience and say, you know, that's a great question. I was able to actually do something similar to that when I volunteered with so-and-so. So I would definitely use that as well. And then the same thing happened once I started working overseas. People could see on my CV that I'd gone and done that volunteer work in New Zealand or gone and done that internship in California. And I think that kind of made it really stand out. So it's a little bit going back to what Jane was saying about being able to show that you've had those life experiences to sort of balance out your studies in school. I think that really helps a lot. And then of course, the volunteering also leads into, and for me, it definitely did, into job opportunities that I wouldn't have even known about because I volunteered with folks and they were able to say, well, yeah, we know that Lance is going to work hard and do a good job and we'll let him know that there's a job coming up. So I can't really understate for me how important it was starting out.
I mean, I think I'll just say it very briefly. I think for me, I would say that is going to be honest. That's going to be a challenge that you're going to face. I mean, and the reason why you're going to face that challenge is because a lot of organizations, conservation organizations or institutions, they don't have a policy. Most of them, from the little experience I have, they don't have a policy of direct hiring of volunteers or interns. I mean, that's always a problem. They don't have a budget because of the budget and financial limitation from the donors. But what I would advise, I think, for fresh students, I mean, I think for you, like what Lance has said is, I mean, just show your passion and work so hard. Make sure that you are well connected with the organization that you'll be volunteering. You never know what the opportunities will come. I remember for me, during my third year of my undergrad degree, I was volunteering in one of the community NGO. And by then there was a scholarship opportunity from the government of Netherlands. It used to call Netherlands Fellowship Program. They are looking for young leaders who are involved in community service to go in Netherlands for short course. And I think because I did something good, I was working well, I showed my passion, I was nominated for that scholarship and ended up going to Netherlands for 4 months. So I didn't get a paid position in that organization, but at least I got something, I got an experience to go abroad, learn something new that I didn't learn, but have an opportunity to travel and fly, which was a big deal. I mean, so I would say, I mean, you might not end up getting a paid position, but it can open up other opportunities. It can be a scholarship, it can be a reference letter from the boss of the organization that you are volunteering, it can be a conference. So you never know. So just show your passion and work to make a mark where you are working.
I'll just quick addition to agree with everything that's been said. Our own organization isn't particularly good at advancing volunteers into full-time positions. That said, when there isn't COVID, we actually have quite a robust volunteer program, which allows people to at least test things out and be in the field with our field staff. But I am a big supporter of internships. Again, even during COVID, we still ran a reduced internship program this summer. And I think we did a survey, oh gosh, a couple of years ago, but nearly 20% of our staff at the time had come to us through internships. And so that's an important way to translate the classroom into real world experience. And it's just making that bridge, right? So that when you go for the first interview for that entry-level job, you have something to fall back on. And it shows initiative. I like Lance's point as well, that it helps you begin to build that network that will be a foundation for you wherever you go for the next 40 years in your career. So all that's extremely important. I never had the chance to practice it in the conservation world, but as I came out of journalism school, I went to do an unpaid, I volunteered, they called it an internship, but an unpaid internship for 6 months at a radio station, which was sufficient to get me into my first full-time job. So it's just, as I say, it's being able to develop your own personal narrative, and an internship or a volunteer position shows that you've taken the initiative, and that's hugely important to your employer.
What's the importance of awareness versus action? You know, what are the different ways you can go about each?
I'll look to my two other colleagues to talk about action. I'll talk a little bit about awareness. But it would seem to me, in a very simple way, without awareness, how are you going to find partners? How are you going to find funders? How are you going to find donors? So awareness is everything in that regard. And you know, if you looked at the structure of our organization, between our communications and marketing teams, for example, and our development staff in the field, you know, a good half of what we do is writing proposals, letting people know what we do, letting people know how we do it, letting people know the impact on the ground of what we do, and being advocates and ambassadors for land conservation. And so I think awareness is hugely important. When I first came to the organization, we had a board member who's since passed on, but had been, you know, very generous to us over the years, but was very old school. And he pulled me to one side and he'd say, "It's all about stealth fundraising, kid. It's all about stealth fundraising." Because we're a major gifts organization, which means most of our donations come from a very small percentage of people, right? They tend to be what we call high net worth Canadians. Rich folks. But and that had been the organization's success in fundraising. So, you know, don't tell a whole lot of people what we do, just stealth fundraising, just one-on-one. It can't work that way anymore. Everybody's got to be involved. This isn't a Nature Conservancy of Canada issue. It's not a Canadian issue. It's a worldwide issue, and we all have to work together. And if people don't know what we're doing and people don't understand the crisis, you know, we're missing team members. So that's my word on awareness.
I think from a third world country perspective, awareness is critical when you want to address sustainability issues or conservation issues. One, because the people we are dealing with, I mean, people, our communities, 60%, 70% are people that live in rural areas. Most of them are uninformed about why they should protect the environment, why they should conserve, why they should preserve wildlife resources. And that's where the awareness aspect comes in, educating, sensitizing them that the reason why you wake up in the morning, you can grow your food, having a farm, do this is because you have these healthy natural resources. If you're going to degrade these natural resources, you're not going to do that. You see right now you have less rains. It's because you are cutting so many trees. That's the critical part of awareness. The other thing is, I mean, we are dealing with problems that are complex. We have high poverty levels, but at the same time, we also want to educate the same people that you have to protect the environment, but these people are depending, there's that over dependence of natural resources. They need trees to cook their food. They have to cut wood to cook their food, but they also need to to cultivate land to grow their food. So how do you balance these issues? I think that's where awareness comes in. It's talking to people so that they can now understand why I have to keep the environment healthy. I have to have these ecological resources well protected so that in the next 10, 50 years, my kids and my other generation can also have the same benefits. And that's why important. And that comes the issue of action as well, where you have now to educate them. Tell them that this is how to do, this is how you can preserve the environment.
Yeah, those are really good points. Especially, I almost think it's not so much awareness versus action. The two of them, they're almost completely linked, and it's just critical that the two of them are working together. Because really, awareness is what leads to action, and then there's not much point doing an action that isn't well informed through through awareness. I think one thing that I've noticed in working with smaller organizations is that you'll actually find yourself doing both of them, and they're just sort of interlinked. I wonder. I think it might be a little bit different in developing countries and in countries like ours, where it's often probably more of a difficult balance between awareness and action. I'm just thinking of the work that we were doing in Madagascar, which was all the same sort of programs that you've been talking about too, where you're really trying to work with people who often really don't have much of a choice. So that awareness is important, but then it's, for me, I find it was almost more the action of going in and helping coming up with alternative solutions for agriculture, and really sticking with that action. But you did have to have that balance of the two. Whereas I think almost in countries like ours, the awareness becomes really important, because that's what kind of galvanizes people, I think, to then change the way that they're doing things, whether it's changing how they consume. But definitely the two are completely interlinked, and it's definitely not one versus the other.
If I can just add for a second, Kieran, and building on the points of my two colleagues, one of my frustrations fairly recently, actually, as we deal with various, marketing campaigns and advertising campaigns and that sort of thing, and you work with agencies external to the organization, and this idea, so they'll develop ideas, and it's okay, so we're working to save nature, right? So there's a separation. There's us, and then there's nature, and there's what we do to nature, and there's what we're doing for nature, and all that, and my constant refrain has been, no, there's no nature and us. We are nature. And trying to bring that awareness is really tough, right? So it speaks to the points that my colleagues have raised about, what we do to the environment impacts our way of life, impacts, all the resources we need to survive as well. So that's a huge piece of the awareness puzzle for me, is to make people aware that it's not us and it is nature, us.
But what sort of role does the media play in raising awareness versus promoting conspiracies?
I'm not sure where I start with that. Well, let me start with, what do you mean by media? Because not all media is created equally. So anyone who's consuming media, I would suggest, this isn't new, even with the expansion into social media. I remember saying this in speeches 20, 30 years ago. When you're trying to inform yourself, your first duty is to look at the source and not to rely on any single source. So to make sure that your sources are well informed, and then you are mediating what you read and what you absorb. So if you're talking about Breitbart News, are they irresponsible? Probably. If you're talking about the Globe and Mail, are they irresponsible? Probably not. So the media has a really important role to play. But the consumer of the media has a hugely important role to play in testing the information you're receiving and tossing out what doesn't make sense, and recognizing that sources are inherently biased, and you need to recognize where that bias is coming from, right? So now I get into social media. I think social media has a lot more responsibility to take on in terms of mitigating irresponsible information and conspiracy theories and all that sorts of thing. But as an educated consumer of information, the ultimate responsibility is yours.
I don't know if I can say better than what Jen has already said, but I will just share my little experience on working with the media. In my previous work, we used to use community radios programs, which is very common in our context. It's easy to reach out to people in rural areas that are not connected to mainstream media, and community radio was one of a major platform for educating and sensitizing community, especially the farmers in rural areas. And you would go out, have an airtime, like 2 hours airtime. Farmers would call, send texts, you would answer questions, they would ask this, they would ask that, you would respond to questions. And after a few months, you go to that community and you see like everyone is excited, they are uninformed. I think the challenge, maybe Jen would be a good person to answer this for me because I'm not a media person. The challenge is to see how the media has the impact to the consumers. I think that for us, from the little experience that I had, it was hard to kind of measure that, like how has this information had the impact, the immediate impact. I think usually it takes time, and I don't know why, compared to the new emerging platforms such as social media where information are instant. So, I mean, I don't have an answer to that, but I think it is true. I mean, media has a huge role, especially in creating awareness and sensitization, make sure that people are taking action to the problems we have, especially at community level.
I will say that, you know, dealing with, in this country, dealing with media, and we do a lot of what we call earned media outreach, which is you take a story from your organization and you try to get it into the news for a lot of reasons. Number one is you don't have to buy an ad, right? So it's actually quite cheap. It's just the sweat of your brow that that's required, the time to make the pitch. And we're able to target various markets. So to Rutta's point, community radio actually is huge for us because our projects are in largely remote areas. And so to engender social license to work where we work, it's important to inform the communities where we're working. So we do a lot of work in community radio. But talking to my media relations director just yesterday about this, and the frustration we have, and I guess the media as well, is that they're contracting, right? And COVID has really put the boots to traditional media in this country. As advertising dollars are down. So we find fewer and fewer of those community outlets where we can tell our stories and where we can generate support for particular projects or particular species at risk or critical habitat, that sort of thing. So that's that becomes frustrating, and I'm not sure what the next step is there. I'm not sure what's going to take the place of those community platforms. And if it's all going to Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, then we're reducing the conversation, you know, at best to 280 characters. And so there's no longer a dialogue happening, right? And so that's quite distressing for me.
What can I be doing now to become a standout applicant in the field?
I think, well, first off, when you are applying for something, the skills really do have to fit the job posting. But really some of the things that I'm really looking for, not just in someone as a hire, but also someone to work with, is being able to show that initiative within your resume or within your application, whether you've actually been able to go out and do something. Did you create something on your own out of nothing, or you know, by writing a blog or setting up network like this one that you folks have, which is terrific. You know, did you help with a workshop or a conference or go to visit a nearby conservation project? So it's not just about the skills and the qualifications that you have, but it's something with, when I'm looking through that CV, that is showing that sort of initiative to go out and do things, even if again they're just really short things that you've gone and done. Something where you went out for a day and visited something to see a conservation program that you're really interested in, or participating in a BioBlitz. So the initiatives are a really key one. Another one is being able to show flexibility, which may come up more within the interview. And then the other really key one for me, and it's probably one of the most important things that I find when I'm working with colleagues, is this ability to demonstrate that you're a problem solver and not a problem creator. I often find that there's some folks that you're working with there where when something comes up, there's automatically obstacles. about not being able to do something. And obviously you have to be thinking along those lines anyway, because you have to be thinking of challenges, but then being able to show that very next step of saying, well, these are the obstacles we might come up against, but these are some of the solutions that I would be proposing. So for me, I think those are three key kind of characteristics, and somehow building them into your CV or your cover letter. But and it's not just about demonstrating a lot of passion for something. That should somehow be in there, but not having it repeated over and over again, but within a cover letter, but having it sort of interwoven within the CV, that extra little bit of passion. And I think also just trying to do something that makes your CV stand out a little bit, so it's a little bit outside the box. If there's 50 applications that come in and they're all technical and dry, but then there's one that comes in and has all the same qualifications, but there's something in there that makes it stand out, whether it's just a photo of the person with a big smile when they're doing something out in the field, or holding an animal, or an extra attachment that you've included of something that you've done that just makes it stand out a little bit. Those are the kinds of things that I would kind of make that application stand out from everyone else's.
What kind of challenges can one expect going into a career in conservation?
Well, I think the first one is, which I think we already spoke about it. It's first of all, I mean, most of entry-level opportunities such as volunteer or interns, most of them are unpaid because of budget and financial constraints that organizations have. I think the other thing that I think maybe it might not be common here is most of non-profit work is non-profit organization. One of the challenges they face is most of their projects are donor funded. So if you are employed, you always get very short-term contracts, some of them 6 months, some of them 1 month, 12 months, maximum 2 years. I remember for me, when I started my job, my first job that I was employed by the German Agency for International Development, GIZ, and it was a contract for 2 years. And whenever I go out and talk to my friends, most of them were like, you are one of the lucky ones, because a lot of them, they had a very short-term contract. Maximum was 12 months. So basically, there's no job security. You will be hunting jobs after every 2 years hunting another job. So I think, to me, that's going to be a huge challenge, especially if you just start up. You're just starting your career. Obviously, you would definitely want to have a job that you can stay and learn, explore, and make sure that you have a tons of experience instead of you changing jobs. So to me, I think those two are probably huge challenges, I think.
That was one of the main points that I was going to, that I'd been thinking of too, was at the very beginning, you do have to be willing to just be able to flexible and jump around a fair bit. I guess one thing that at least as a conservation biologist is that you need to really care about what you're doing, because you're probably not going to be working a 9-to-5 job, and you might not get all your weekends off. And I think all of us, we sort of have, that's a challenge in and of itself, because we have to make sure that we avoid burnout. Something that's happened to me a couple times in my career, but I think that's just something that each person has to sort out on their own. Although organizations have gotten a lot better about this, especially here in Canada, because we really don't want to be losing good people. But the work is never really done, so you have to find that balance of still being passionate and doing the work, but not being burnt out. And I think it was sort of alluded to there, but you're really not going into a career that provides you with a very high standard of living. You can make it work, but it won't be a career where you're going to be putting a lot of money in the bank.
Yeah, I would agree with all those points. And whether it's a career in conservation or anything else, to be quite honest, really, look at those expectations as you walk into that first job, because you do have to be flexible. You do have to be willing to work evenings. You do have to be willing to do a Sunday afternoon stint. and it may not be paid, right? If you're looking for 9 to 5 and those guaranteed routines, then you maybe want to look at a public institution, right? You maybe want to look at government jobs and those kinds of things, which will provide you the saw-off is you'll get a certain degree of security or regularity to what you do, but you may lose out on the excitement, the opportunity, the variety that you will get elsewhere. So really look deep in yourself and ask what are your expectations for those first few years, and think through what that might cost you. Right?
How optimistic are you about climate change and the biodiversity crisis? Is it too late? And can we as individuals make a difference?
Well, depends what mood I'm in. But look, you can't be a pessimist and work in conservation. There's no room for pessimism. The very nature of what you do is preparing the world for the future, right? Leaving behind something for the next generation. So you have to be an optimist deep down. Otherwise you'd pop in and pop out of the business. You couldn't do it. So I will say that I am optimistic. I am often disillusioned by the bigger world and what's happening. But my hope is that collectively, humankind will get its act together and figure out that there's no plan B, and that we now have to direct our efforts collectively to protect what we have. What was the second half of the question? Sorry,
It would have been, can we as individuals make a difference?
Yes, you can, but again, don't be disillusioned. And even within our organization, we kind of, we'll protect a piece of land and say, oh, yeah, but it's so small compared with what we have to do nationally and then internationally, right? So we can, by making the commitment and being the ambassador and the advocate and doing our work, but there needs to be many, many more of you, right? So we have to work as a much larger community and society to get where we need to go.
I think as a young person, I am optimistic, and I'm hopeful that we will find ways to fix the climate crisis. Am I disappointed? Yes, I am. I am very disappointed. And I would say the reason why I'm disappointed, I think we have had a lot of discussions about climate crisis for so many years, and I'm disappointed by the countries that are supposed to do more work. I don't think they're doing more work. And if we have world leaders such as Trump, who are still denying very publicly that climate change is not a huge problem, I think that's disappointing from a person that comes from countries that have a very small contribution when it comes to CO2 emissions. But on the other hand, I'm also optimistic because if you look at numbers, in the last maybe 15, 20 years, we have seen a lot of advancement and investment in clean energy technologies, particularly solar and wind energy. And the beauty about this, the interesting part is most of these investments are coming from developing countries, India being one of them, China. So what does this tell us? It tells us that in the near future, I think these kind of technologies are going to be way cheaper, but they're also going to be more accessible to the low-income market, which are more vulnerable to climate change. That gives me hope that I think we are going to fix this in a way. And if you look at the history, I mean, in the future, we used to have a lot of problems that people thought we are not going to address them. Give up, for example, apartheid in South Africa. I mean, a lot of us thought this is not going to be fixed. We had the civil rights movement in the US, poverty. So I think I am optimistic as a young person. I think we are going to fix this. It might take time, it might take a collective effort and global commitment, but I think there's a hope that we are going to fix it. In terms of does individuals make a difference? Of course, coming from a place where we have tons of problems, every simple action counts, whether it's educating an indigenous community about water issues, either it's going to the field, protecting the wild animals, every single action, especially from young people, it saves. I mean, last year we saw Greta Thunberg. I mean, you could see the excitement, you could see the passion. I mean, she had an opportunity to meet world leaders pushing the agenda for climate change. That gives me hope as a young person. It gives me that I think we have a better future.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, I would say that I'm deeply concerned, and I really feel like, you know, these both climate change and the biodiversity crisis are things that we've been talking about for a while, but it's really now where it isn't just something that is going to happen, it's something that is happening right now. But I'm still very optimistic that these are things that we will be able to fix. Even if you look at the last couple of years, there's been so many different reports that have come out that have been pretty shocking. And every couple of years, WWF puts out their Living Planet report. And last year we had the major United Nations global assessment study. And both of those are coming out and saying that 25%, 1 in every 4 of species on our planet are in danger of extinction. There was a report in Science in 2019 around how in North America we have 3 billion fewer birds than we did 30 years ago. And there's been other reports that have been coming out in the last few years. But the one thing that's a commonality in all those reports is that they're also providing all kinds of solutions. So if you go to and have a look at their websites, all the solutions are there. Everything from what needs to be done at the policy level or the government level, all the way down to what each of us can do as individuals. Just this morning in the news, you know, I saw a whole bunch of different things as I was sort of shuffling through, and they were all talking about things that are happening or going to happen very soon to help the environment. Canada is going to be banning single-use plastics by the end of 2021. There was an article about the biggest coal-fired plant in the US is going to be investing more than $1 billion in this new technology for carbon capture and storage. Prince William has started up this new major, I just saw this morning, it was great, major award that's going to be giving £1 million per year to a number of different organizations that work in the environment and individuals. The federal and provincial government here in Ontario is going to be investing, each of them are going to be investing $250 million in the production of electric cars. So I kind of feel like there's all these different things that are even in the mainstream news now that are you know, pointing out that it's not just we realize that there's these problems, but that there's some solutions as well. And so, you know, I think all of us can make a difference as individuals. Even when I think of when I'm talking to my friends who work in housing development, and you know, they don't have the same sort of interests and backgrounds that I do. Often when we're sitting around, we do start talking about plastics or sustainable palm oil or endangered species. And so I feel like there's this, I actually feel like we're in a moment now that we haven't had before, where you know, it's within our social consciousness that people are talking about these things. Everybody's talking about having the backyard set up for as a friendly place for pollinators. So I feel like at the individual level, in the general public, there are things that are happening. But then, of course, when I look back on my career, I think that those of us that are now even just chatting now here, I think we can all have an even greater impact. I don't feel like I'm anything particularly special or even particularly bright, but because I sort of followed what I wanted to do, I've ended up managing recovery programs for a large number of endangered species, eight species that I know of that have been recently declared safe from extinction. So, you know, they probably would have been safe without me, but I do kind of feel like I contributed to that. And so I kind of really do feel quite strongly that each of us sort of follow whatever it is that we're interested in, and we stay stubborn, we don't give up, that we really can make a difference.
And I'll end on one last request of you. If you had, it came from Alex, if you had one piece of advice you'd like to give to the people here in the call today, what would it be?
I think I would say if if you can, if it's possible for you, find an opportunity to come and do some international volunteer, come abroad to broaden up your perspective, just have a different context about how other communities are dealing with issues. For me personally, I find it to be so interesting, eye-opening. There's so much that you can learn. So I would encourage, I know it's expensive and I know it takes time, but if you can do that, please, I would help out to organize anything for any Canadian student who is interested to come and volunteer in Tanzania. There's so much that you can learn when you get out of your comfort zone, out of your normal settings, and come and learn something different.
I was going to say something almost exactly the same, and basically where I would really encourage folks to find a way to travel once the pandemic's under control and it's safe to do so, and to see how conservation works in other countries. Yeah, I think you'll find it will really be eye-opening to see how much more integrated local communities are with conservation programs in other countries than they are here in Canada. And I think it provides you a whole other way of looking at things when you're carrying out conservation back here. So I would definitely recommend that. And then the other thing I would recommend that worked really well for me when I was, again, trying to create those networks and trying to build a career was, don't ever feel shy just about trying to find a way to contact somebody who's already working in doing something that you're already really interested in. Because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised and maybe a bit amazed how many of them will actually write back. And even if they can't offer you an immediate job, they'll be able to provide you with advice. And it doesn't even matter what level they are within their field. I think you'll be really surprised at how many would write back.
I think that's a great idea. My experience in this sector is that it is a sector of kind souls, and you don't run into difficult characters from time to time, but basically people are in this business for good. To do good, and they want to share what they know. Two quick things. One on the micro level, I would say pay attention to detail, particularly in your application processes. You don't know how many times I've received an application a letter from someone saying, "Dear Ms. Gilbert, I am delighted to be sending you the application for your position in the WWF Canada." I don't work for WWF Canada, right? So people will take their standard template letters and not check the details, right? So follow the job posting to the T, pick up the key language, and make sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed. So many people don't do that, and they wind up on the remainder bin. What was the last piece I was going to say? Both now and through the rest of your career, be a good storyteller. Develop your personal narrative. Have your personal story ready. So when you have that chance in an elevator and you've got 20 seconds to the 5th floor and somebody asks you, what do you do? That you can tell them. And then you can express what you're doing now, what you want to do in the future, and why you're good at it, right? Develop your own story. That's it.
Right, wise words from all of us. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our speakers for being here and for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been fantastic.